Welcome, brave listener, to Silent Voice Heard, an audiobook series where we step into the shadows and walk the line between reality and our unspoken nightmares. So settle in, dim the lights and prepare to lose yourself in today's tale from Book 1, Cloaked in Shadows. What happened to Chris?
Amidst the pulsating lights and rhythmic beats of the dimly lit club, I stood with my untouched drink in hand, absorbing the energy around me, inhaling it like sweet spring air. The lighting pivoted from every direction, sweeping across the dance floor, the beams cutting through the fog in flowing waves of deep blues and purples, enveloping the moving bodies who swayed to the music, casting vibrant hues across the dance floor. The walls and ceilings adorned with reflective panels, amplifying the effect, expanding the space like a kaleidoscope. Along the perimeter of the dance floor, the fog fell away, the light's ambient glow softened, illuminating the faces of those taking a break from the main crowd. I noticed a group of friends laugh and twirl, their movements fluid and carefree as they stepped over the invisible boundary. They exchanged smiles and playful nudges, lost in the euphoria of the moment. Behind them, a couple swayed with effortless grace, their bodies pressed close together. Unlike the masses in front of me, I was not here to play. At 27, I had carved my path in pursuit of a career in music, and my journey had led me to a coveted position at a prominent music company, where I quickly ascended through the ranks. I was only here to meet an eccentric client and owner of the club. Standing near the bar, I watched as laughter mingled with the melodies, and conversations ebbed and flowed like the tide as rows of people waited to be served. On occasion, I would tilt my head, acknowledging a familiar face that passed by. Surrounded by the chaos of the crowd, I found solace in the stillness within myself, happy with my lot so far. Despite the bustling social circles that surrounded me, making up a diverse array of friends and cherished family, I was a solitary being, preferring to spend my time engrossed in the melodies of the 20s and 30s, which, in my opinion, exceeded the quality of today's modern droning beats. A female passed me, slowing to look me up and down. Our eyes locked briefly before I turned away. It felt rude. She was pretty, but this wasn't the time. I knew I was attractive, my appearance often drawing admiring glances and whispered compliments. I was in my physical prime, lean and muscular. I had been told that my best feature was my angular cheekbones, which had a sculpted definition. However, I liked my hazel eyes, the replica of my late mother's, though hers sparkled with the life she embraced every day until her last. I saw my colleagues heading in my direction and inhaled, preparing myself for the inevitable evening ahead. As predicted after the meeting, my colleagues and I were invited to eat at the club owner's restaurant next door to. This was just a normal business trip. 3 days of back-to-back meetings, intermingled with exhausting social engagements where I had to become someone else to entertain and amuse. So I donned my biggest smile and followed everyone out the club and into the building next door. For the brief moment we were outside, I looked up, taking in the full moon, which hung high in the sky like a glowing lantern, casting its ethereal light over the bustling streets. The stars seemed to retreat, outshone by the moon's brilliance, leaving the heavens a deep, velvety indigo. We were hustled into a table by the window. I looked once more at the moon before turning my attention to my co-workers, all ready to embark on an evening of camaraderie and light-hearted conversation. Little did I know that this seemingly ordinary dinner would mark the beginning of a descent into the unknown. Amidst the lively chatter and clinking of glasses, an enigmatic presence entered our midst. An older woman of striking allure, her flaming auburn hair and gaze imbued with wisdom beyond her years. As she settled into her seat next to mine, a palpable energy enveloped the table, drawing us into her orbit. It wasn't long before the conversation veered into the realm of our shared passions, and to my delight I discovered a kindred spirit in this captivating stranger as we discussed our shared favourite subject. I soon became oblivious to the subtle glances exchanged by my colleagues as we delved into the depths of our mutual fascination, our dialogue weaving a tapestry of shared experiences and esoteric knowledge. Her captivating smile and sparkling eyes leaned in closer to me, her words carrying a sense of warmth and familiarity. I am normally reserved and composed, however. As the hours slipped by, the conversation between us deepened. The rest of the group faded into the background, mere spectators to the silent connection between me and this amazing creature. As the evening meal came to an end, she extended an invitation to continue our conversation at hers. My initial excitement was tinged with a sense of unease, a glint in her eyes. Her hand she had gently placed high above my knee told me she wanted more. Despite the undeniable connection we shared, my resolve to never mix business with pleasure surfaced. I had this rule for a reason, and it had served me well over the years, so I politely declined, saying I had an early breakfast meeting I needed to prep for. As we all rose, I announced my intention to head back to my hotel when my colleagues suggested returning to the club. I turned to thank my new friend for a lovely evening and suggested meeting another time to diffuse the potential tension. I was eager to extricate myself from the situation. However, as I faced her, her face darkened and she leaned in and whispered, "We didn't even get to talk about my biggest love." I leaned back to better look into her eyes, my eyebrows raised. "Witchcraft," she declared, her voice tinged with a sinister edge. She leaned back in again, her breath warming my now flushed cheek. "I don't like being shunned. I gave you an opportunity to experience a very intimate time with me, but you refused," she snarled. "No one turns me down, so you leave me no choice. I'm going to put a curse on you. You're going to be dead within a month." I stepped back, trying to compose myself. After all, I was surrounded by colleagues and clients. This was not the time to cause a scene. What kind of madness was this? How had my charming dining companion turned so quickly? Her revelation had chilled me to the core. Stunned into silence by the gravity of her proclamation, I smiled at those mingling near the table and stiffly left the restaurant. I fled into the night, congratulating myself on keeping to my rules and steering away from any chance of craziness. 2 days later, now home, my case unpacked, and the washing machine thrumming in the other room, I recounted the bizarre encounter with my friend and old college roommate Pete. "You won't believe what happened at the dinner," I exclaimed, practically bursting at the seams to spill the details. He leaned forward across the kitchen table, a mischievous grin spreading across his face. "All right, hit me with it. What happened?" I took a deep breath and launched into the night's events, describing the beautiful woman, starting with her appearance, knowing he would want to know, our discovered shared interest, the end of the evening with her invitation. Pete's grin widened, his eyes twinkled. "You dark horse, Chris, tell me more." I shook my head. I admitted I had been tempted, but then I told him her response to my rejection. Pete's eyes widened. "You're kidding me! What did you do?" "I left as quickly as I could," I chuckled. "But it has left me a little unnerved, you know," I admitted. Pete grinned, shaking his head in disbelief. "Only you would turn down the crazy," he laughed. Together we dismissed the curse from the beautiful woman with light-hearted banter, finding solace in the absurdity of the situation. As the days unfolded in the familiar rhythms of my life, I allowed myself to sink back into the comforting embrace of routine and almost forgot the encounter. Yet, as the sun dipped below the horizon and darkness descended upon the city a week later, a foreboding chill crept into the night air. I'm not sure when I realized something was off. I lived alone and usually enjoyed the solitude, but this night I found myself scanning every corner as if something was missing, but I couldn't put my finger on it. Blaming it on tiredness, I decided to get an early night. Nestled in the quiet seclusion of my bedroom, as my mind settled and I began to doze, I heard something that sounded like a whisper. At first, I dismissed it as a trick of the mind, an overactive imagination in the stillness of the night. I pulled the covers up and continued to drift into unconsciousness. Then I heard it again, whispers from the other side of my bedroom door. Like a flick of a switch, I was now wide awake, the tranquility of the night shattered. My immediate thought was that someone had entered my apartment. No, I rationalized. They would have to get past the gates, then security, before even reaching my front door, and I had locked everything up. I was 100% positive. With trembling fingers, I reached for the light switch, illuminating the dim expanse of my room in a harsh glare. A sudden movement caught my eye, a fleeting shadow that darted across the room with furtive haste. A tight knot formed deep in my stomach. My mouth went dry as the thought of an intruder invaded my mind once more. My eyes widened as the whispers begun. They seemed to emanate from every corner of the room. No, this is not real, I thought. Driven by instinct, I embarked on a frantic search, my footsteps echoing in the empty silence as I prowled through my apartment, turning on every light as I moved from room to room. Each flicker of movement or fleeting glimpse of shadow sent a jolt of terror coursing through my veins, propelling me around the apartment like a trapped animal. No matter where I looked, I found nothing. Yet the whispers persisted just out of reach, their elusive presence taunting me. They seemed to echo from the very walls themselves. As the night wore on, I found myself ensnared in a nightmarish cycle of pursuit and evasion, only seeing from the corner of my eye, never finding anything, but I knew with every shred of my being, something was nearby. I grappled with the terrifying realization that I was not alone, and that unseen forces lurked in the shadows, waiting to ensnare me in their sinister web. As the sun rose, lighting the apartment in its morning glow, the whispering ceased. Exhausted, I returned to my bed, thankful it was the weekend. My head heavy, I lay listening, but heard nothing more. I stared up at the ceiling, sure that my mind was playing tricks. I had searched every corner but found nothing. By the next evening, I had convinced myself that it had been a vivid dream, nothing more. I had been working ridiculously long hours lately, and maybe a weekend of doing nothing would be the perfect remedy to reset my frazzled nerves. I spent the day catching up on series I had not yet finished watching and rearranged my wardrobe, filling a bag of unwanted clothes I would take to the charity shop. Time easily slipped by, and it was nearly midnight when I finally turned off the TV and headed to bed. As soon as I was about to drift off to sleep, the whispering began again. The sound was faint at first, barely more than a breath against the stillness of the room, but it quickly grew louder, more insistent. My heart pounded as I lay there, before I mustered the courage to spring out of bed. Driven by a mix of anger and frustration, I repeated my frantic searches, prowling through the apartment with the same desperation as before. Someone was playing tricks with me, and I didn't like it. Not one bit. I turned on every light, checked every corner, and even looked under the furniture, but just like the previous night, I found nothing. The whispers seemed to mock my efforts, always just out of reach, slipping away into the shadows as soon as I got close. By the third night, I was utterly exhausted. The lack of sleep had taken its toll, leaving me feeling hollow and jittery. Dark circles under my eyes, and a constant sense of unease had become my new normal. Desperate for a solution, I decided to try something different. I scoured the internet and downloaded the dullest audiobook I could find, a lengthy historical account narrated by a man with a painfully slow, monotone voice. The kind of voice that seemed designed to put listeners to sleep rather than entertain them. With my earpods in place and the volume turned up just enough to drown out the whispers, I pulled the covers high above my head. The fabric felt comforting, a barrier between me and the intangible menace that lurked in the darkness. I closed my eyes and focused on the droning voice of the narrator, who was recalling obscure historical events I had absolutely no interest in. The steady, monotonous rhythm of his words began to have the desired effect, lulling me into a state of drowsiness. Despite my anxiety, my eyelids grew heavy, and I felt myself beginning to drift off, clinging to the hope that tonight I might finally find some rest. As I lay listening to the hum of his voice, the words blurring, I realized that instead of warming under the covers, my sheets were slowly chilling, as if I was laying on a bed of ice and the warmth of my body was being drawn out. I shifted, but felt even colder. I opened my eyes and stared up, waiting for them to adjust to the darkness. Out of the corner of my eye, near the bedroom door, I saw something dash across my periphery. I followed the shadowy figure as it darted across the room. I sat bolt upright and stared at the corner, the movement causing my earpods to fall out. The whispering was all around me now, so I swung my legs out of bed, grabbed my keys from my bedside table and, without care for still being dressed in my pajamas, I left the apartment. The soft glow of dawn began to seep through the curtains, illuminating the darkened room. My eyes flickered open, and I glanced up at the unfamiliar floral wallpaper. I shifted, remembering that I had gone around to Pete's house the night before. He had opened the door, made a comment about my attire, and then headed back to his bedroom, leaving me to sort myself out. I knew his place like I know my own, so within minutes I had made the bed and was fast asleep in the guest bedroom. I grabbed my phone from the bedside table and tapped. I growled under my breath as the screen remained blank. I heard noises from downstairs. I tilted my head to listen to the gentle thudding of footsteps and smiled as a subtle whiff of coffee began to tickle my nostrils. I headed down and found my friend dancing around his kitchen, a steaming cup in hand. His wide grin faded as he took in my appearance. "Mate, you look awful." "Cheers," I replied, my hand reaching for the coffee pot on the table. I soon spilled out my night, describing the haunting laughter and the inexplicable shadows that seemed to dance in the corners of my apartment. Pete listened intently, his brow furrowing in concern as he tried to make sense of what I was saying. In all the years I had known him, Pete had never been one to believe in the supernatural. He was pragmatic, grounded, and a no BS kind of guy. The idea that I would be spooked by something as intangible as a shadow figure seemed utterly foreign to him. Yet, as I recounted my ordeal, I could see his unease. I half hoped he thought I was going crazy. I hadn't realized at the time that Pete was genuinely terrified. He found it weird that his friend of over 10 years had become scared of noises, like a child afraid of the dark. It was so unlike me that he was convinced that there was something lurking in my apartment. And despite his efforts to reassure me, Pete couldn't shake the feeling of helplessness as he listened to my distress. He could only hope that whatever had plagued my nights wouldn't return. He suggested calling the police, saying that someone was pranking me, and he offered to come over after work and check it out. But as he suggested it, in the light of day, with the morning sun pouring in through the windows warming my back, the idea of us searching for a hidden prankster was ridiculous, so I declined his offer. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the streets as I trudged home. All I wanted was some food and my bed. The fading light lent an eerie atmosphere to the neighborhood, amplifying every creak and rustle setting my already shattered nerves on edge, and as I turned the corner onto my road, a prickling sensation crept up my spine, as if invisible eyes were boring into my back. I glanced over my shoulder, but the empty pavement offered no solace. Heart pounding, I picked up the pace, the rhythmic echo of my footsteps reverberating in the stillness. But no matter how fast I walked, the feeling of being watched persisted, a suffocating presence looming just beyond his line of sight. My breath came in shallow gasps, my senses heightened, attuned to every sound and movement. Suddenly, a soft whisper brushed against my ear, so faint I almost dismissed it as a trick of the wind. "Turn back," it seemed to murmur, a chilling command that made every hair on my body stand in response. I shook my head. "Get a grip of yourself." I intentionally slowed my pace and inhaled deliberately to force myself to calm down. It worked. I fumbled for my keys as I reached my building entrance, and as I paused to push open the door, a shadow shifted in the corner of my eye. A fleeting glimpse of something tall leaning against the wall. I spun around, but the road was empty. Swallowing hard, I turned back and pushed the door forward, the sensation of being watched lingering like a phantom touch on my skin. With trembling hands, I pulled out my phone, and as I walked to my front door, I called the local takeaway for my usual. I turned on the television, settling on watching the news, and tapped up the volume. As I began eating my noodles and watched a reporter duck behind a building in some war-torn country, his account about the latest bombing not reaching my weary mind. I was so tired I could hardly chew my food, so I decided to head to bed early, not bothering to turn off the TV or lights. I had sunk into my bed and drifted into a deep sleep within minutes. I roused in the darkness to the whispering close by. With a surge of adrenaline, I leapt from my bed, flipping on every light in my apartment in a desperate bid to chase away the shadows. But the whispers eluded me, their ethereal voices taunting me from unseen corners. I prowled through the rooms, my heart hammering in my chest, searching for a source that seemed to vanish as quickly as it appeared. Frustration gnawed, mingling with the rising tide of fear that threatened to consume me whole. Then, in the dim glow of a flickering lamp, I finally saw it and froze. A dark silhouette lurking in the corner, its form shifting and wavering like smoke in the wind. My pulse quickened, goosebumps spread across my skin. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end as I apprehensively approached, my breath catching in my throat. But as I drew nearer, the figure dissolved into nothingness. I blinked. What the... I grappled with the reality of my situation. Was this a manifestation of my sleep-deprived mind, or something more sinister lurking in the depths of my apartment? As I stood staring at the empty corner, my thoughts drifted back to the memory of the woman and her crazy threat. Her beauty had been mesmerizing, and her presence was like a beacon of light in the darkness of my world. Had I met her outside of the work environment, I would have accepted her invitation and discovered what was underneath her sheer black dress, which had hugged her curvy frame so well. But beneath that veneer of serenity lurked a chilling threat, a warning that echoed in the recesses of my mind like a sinister refrain. I remembered the intensity of her gaze and the weight of her last words. As I grappled with the horrors unfolding in my own home, I couldn't help but wonder, was she connected to the nightmares that now plagued me? The following day, I hesitated to reach out to Pete again, my mind plagued by doubt and uncertainty. Instead, reasoned it was all happening in my mind. Her words had somehow triggered my paranoia, and that instead of something dark and inexplicable lurking in the shadows, closing in on me with each passing night, I was manifesting it into being. I didn't believe in this crap. No, tonight, I decided, I would take a few sleeping pills. Maybe if I got one decent night's sleep, I would feel better and able to shrug off my obvious hallucinations. I slipped under the covers, exhaustion pulling at every fibre of my being. The consecutive nights of restless tossing and turning, followed by full days' work, having to be the charismatic colleague to all, had left me drained. But tonight I was determined to surrender to sleep, convinced that the eerie experiences of the past nights were merely manifestations of stress and sleep deprivation. As I drifted into slumber, I whispered reassurances to myself as I closed my eyes. My peace was abruptly torn away when I awoke in the dead of night, my body frozen in place. The room was silent, but as cold as a walk-in freezer. I exhaled and watched my breath curl up in wisps. Panic surged through me as I realized I couldn't move. I could not even twitch a finger. I was trapped in my own body, listening to the pounding of my racing heartbeat. The smell of rot and decay wafted through the air. The whispers returned. They seemed to emanate from all around me, but now I could make out strange words, repeating over and over. My heart pounded as I strained to make sense of the sinister voices, my fear mounting with each passing second. Every hair on my body stood on end as I lay there, a helpless witness to the chilling symphony of murmurs that swirled around me. With a fervent prayer, I hoped against hope that it was all just a nightmare, a figment of my exhausted mind. I willed myself to wake up, but deep down, a gnawing dread told me this was real, threatening to consume me in its suffocating grip. With a surge of terror, I watched as the shadowy figure materialized from the darkness at the bottom of the bed, its form looming over me like a murky cloud on a sunny day, sucking the warmth from around me. My heart hammered as it spread out and slowly morphed into a humanoid shape. Then its hands extended towards me and wrapped around my throat with a vice-like grip. Panic coursed through me as I struggled to draw in a breath, my vision blurring at the edges as my oxygen supply dwindled. Desperation clawed as I tried to break free from the creature's hold, but my limbs remained stubbornly paralyzed, making me powerless. The figure lifted me effortlessly from the bed, its grip tightening with each passing moment, squeezing the life from me in a frozen, suffocating embrace. With a sickening thud, I was thrown back onto the mattress, gasping for air as the figure vanished into the shadows. My body trembled with fear as I lay there, the echoes of my own ragged breaths filling the silent room. Time seemed to stretch endlessly as I waited, my mind consumed by the certainty of my impending demise. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of the wind outside seemed to herald the return of the malevolent presence that had invaded my home. But as the minutes ticked by, the figure did not reappear. Exhaustion washed over me in a tidal wave, my muscles aching, and my mind reeled from the ordeal. I surrendered to the darkness, slipping away as sleep claimed me once more. As my eyes fluttered open, I was greeted by the harsh light of morning filtering through my open curtains. With a groan, I rolled over, my body stiff. My eyes widened in horror at the sight before me, my blood-stained sheets a testament of the night before. With trembling hands, I ran my fingers over my neck, feeling the new crustaceans of scabs forming tangible evidence of the creature's assault. The memory of the shadowy figure's attack etched into my mind with chilling clarity. Without hesitation, I reached for my phone, fingers shaking as I dialed Pete's number. As Pete listened in disbelief to my harrowing account, he wanted to come over, but I insisted as it was daytime there was no need. He urged me to contact the authorities, to seek help, but how would the police react to my account? Yes, officer, a shadowy figure floating above me in the middle of the night did this. No way I'd end up sectioned. In desperation, I hesitated as Pete continued to urge me to seek help. I was torn between the need for help and the fear of being dismissed as delusional. Instead, a new idea formed. I remembered a weird little shop tucked down a narrow cobblestone street, sandwiched between a dusty old bookstore and a crumbling antique shop. Its exterior painted a deep midnight blue, with fading gold letters that spell out a name long obscured by time. The windows were cluttered with woven dream catchers hanging from frayed strings, their feathers swaying gently despite the still air. On dusty velvet boxes, small glass bottles filled with an array of coloured liquids, which seemed to catch the light and cast strange dancing reflections on the window frames, which themselves were adorned with intricate carvings of ancient symbols worn smooth in parts by time. On late nights, when I was passing, I had seen the owner, a short man with long, thinning hair, sitting outside on the step, looking up at the moon. I would go to him and see if he had any suggestions. 2 hours later, wearing a long-sleeve polo neck shirt covering my wounds, I entered the shop, the heavy incense hitting the back of my throat. I awkwardly approached the man and asked if he had any books on unwanted guests in the night. The man mindlessly pointed to a section on a nearby wall, and I walked over. I had not expected such a choice, and stood dumbfounded, staring at the wall lined with books. I hadn't noticed the man had followed me until he spoke. "Is there a specific entity you're having trouble with?" he asked in a thick northern accent. I wondered if I should tell him what was happening, but decided not to, so instead replied, "Dark shadow floating above my bed." He nodded and pulled out a thick, leather-bound book with gold script nestled among the shelves. "This book holds the answers you seek," he said, pressing it into my hands. His voice lowered, "But be warned, not all will want you to read this." His quick eyes darted across my face. Did he see the unwashed hair, dark circles and red eyes? Did he watch when I stiffly walked in and understand my predicament? I shook my head internally. No, he probably saw a crazed man and wanted to get rid as soon as possible. I paid for the book and a selection of items I could only describe as ornaments he had suggested I use, and promptly left. I returned home, cleaned up and settled on my sofa, delving into the pages, my fingers tracing the words of incantations and rituals, my bag of ornaments forgotten by the front door. The hours passed like minutes as I pored over the text, my mind consumed by the promise of uncovering the truth, but finding nothing, struggling to understand the old words that filled the pages. I hadn't noticed the day turned to night. I hadn't thought to eat, however. As the clock struck 1 a.m., a chill swept through the apartment, extinguishing the lights like candles in the wind. Shadows danced upon the walls, twisting and writhing like spectres in the night. And then, in the darkness, I heard it. The unmistakable sound of laughter echoing through the empty room. With trembling hands, I clutched the book to my chest. In the darkness of the night, I knew that I would never truly escape the ghosts that now haunted my home. I sat motionless, letting the night play out, not reacting, just becoming the audience to my own horror movie. As dawn broke over the horizon, my apartment stood silent and still, its secrets buried deep within its walls. I must have fallen asleep on the sofa. My silent slumber was abruptly interrupted by the sharp, piercing trill of a phone ringing, but I didn't want to move. Then a loud, insistent pounding that echoed through the room. But it was too early. They can come back another time. I remain curled on the sofa, clutching the book, savouring the calm, letting it wash over me like a gentle wave, soothing my weary soul and replenishing my spirit. I heard a noise above me and felt something prod my shoulder. I glanced up and found Pete standing looking down, his arms folded and brow furrowed. "Mate, what is going on?" he asked. I shrugged. I had no energy for his questions. He exhaled heavily and grabbed my arm, pulling me up out of the chair. "Get up, go shower," he instructed. 24 hours later, I found myself sitting alone on a plane with one plan: go back to the club and find the woman. It had only occurred to me when I had sat down and fastened my seatbelt. I didn't know her name. We had all been introduced to her at the table, I'm sure. But what was her name? How had I gone a whole night chatting with her and not asked? Why could I not remember? I prided myself on my memory, the little details that made me stand out. I knew the names and birthdays of all my colleagues' partners and children. Mrs. Kensley, the long-suffering wife of my boss, Mark, loved white chocolate cookies from the local bakery, and how Jacob, an elderly man who cleans the office floors and moans at everyone who dares walk on it until it's fully dry, likes to pack his doorstep cheese and pickle sandwiches and go on long train journeys just for the delight of watching the world go by. Last Christmas, I had bought him a ticket to Scotland and wrapped it around a jar of Bransons. He had a tear in his eye. But the lady I spend an entire evening in deep conversation with, the lady who, if I was an artist, I could draw her face in precise detail, her name eluded me. That same thought hung heavy in my mind as I walked into the club. Just like the earlier visit, the club was bustling. Its pulsing beats reverberated through my chest as I stepped inside, the dim lights casting erratic shadows across the moving crowd. My eyes darted around, scanning the sea of faces, each one a blur of motion and colour. The cacophony of laughter, conversation and music created a disorienting symphony, but I pushed through, my focus unwavering. I wove through the throngs of people, my heart pounding with a mix of apprehension and determination. Every now and then, I caught glimpses of red hair or a familiar silhouette, only to realize it wasn't her. My frustration mounted with each false lead. Reaching the bar, I leaned over and caught the bartender's attention. "Hey," I shouted over the music. "I'm looking for someone. Red hair, green eyes, about this tall." I gestured with my hand. The bartender, a young man with a thick beard, squinted at me. "Lot of people come through here, buddy. Can't say I remember." Undeterred, I turned to the nearest patron, a woman in a sequined dress nursing a cocktail. "Excuse me, have you seen a woman with red hair and green eyes? She might have been here a few times." The woman glanced at me, then shrugged, her expression indifferent. "Sorry, no idea." I moved on, approaching a group of friends huddled around a high table. "Excuse me, have any of you seen—" "Hey man, we're just here to have a good time." One of them cut me off, his tone dismissive. My desperation grew with each dead end. I circled the club, checking every corner, every shadowy nook. Just as I was about to give up, I noticed a figure partially hidden in the dim light of a secluded booth. My heart skipped a beat. I approached cautiously, the noise of the club fading into the background. As I got closer, the figure turned slightly, revealing a face that sent a jolt of recognition through me. It was her. My steps quickened, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Hey," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We need to talk." She looked up, her green eyes meeting mine with an unreadable expression. "I was wondering when you'd come back," she said quietly, her voice almost lost in the din of the club. I slid into the booth opposite her, my mind racing. I wasn't about to waste time. "I need to know the truth about what you did to me," I demanded, leaning in close. She sighed, her gaze steady. "You think you know what's going on, but you have no idea. This isn't what you think it is." I clenched my fists, fighting to keep my anger in check. "Then explain it to me. Make me understand." She nodded slowly, her eyes softening. "All right, but you need to be prepared. The truth isn't easy to accept." I leaned forward, my eyes locked on the woman across from me. I couldn't take my eyes off her. She was breathtaking. But this wasn't the time to admire her. I needed answers. She took a deep breath, her gaze steady and calm. "Listen carefully," she began. "Do you remember what I said that night?" I nodded. "You cursed me." She sighed. "No, you're not remembering the right part. I was warning you about something far more dangerous." "A warning? What do you mean?" "The things I've seen and felt, they were real." "They were," she confirmed, "but they weren't meant to harm you. They were meant to protect you." I shook my head as images of the past few nights flashed through my mind. The sounds in my apartments, the inexplicable cold spots, the shadows that moved without a source. No, nothing that had happened felt like protection. I pulled down my collar. "Does this look like protecting me?" I asked. She leaned in, her eyes briefly widening before she composed herself. "Think back," she urged. "Remember the first night you saw the shadowy figure. You felt an overwhelming sense of dread, didn't you?" I nodded slowly, the memory surfacing with vivid clarity. "Yes, I thought I was losing my mind." "That was your first warning," she explained. "The shadow was a manifestation of the malevolent force. I placed a protective barrier around you, but it wasn't enough to completely block it out." Flashbacks continued to flood my mind. I recalled the night the whispers began. Then I remembered seeing a set of glowing eyes staring at me from the darkness. How had I forgotten this? And the eyes, my voice trembling. I saw eyes in the darkness. "Another warning," she confirmed. "Every unsettling event was a sign that the force was growing stronger, getting closer." I shook my head, struggling to piece it all together. "But why me? What does this force want?" "Another warning," she confirmed. "A sign that the force was growing stronger, getting closer." I was struggling to piece it all together. But why me? What does this force want? "It's not about what it wants," she replied softly. "It's about who you are. There's something within you, something powerful, that this creature desires. It seeks to consume and corrupt it." I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. "How do you know all of this?" Her eyes held a depth of sorrow and resolve. "Because I've encountered it before, and I made a vow to protect those it targets. The first night we met, it wasn't by chance. I had seen the darkness in your shadow and knew it was only a matter of time before it made its move." The weight of her words settled over me, a mix of fear and understanding. "So, everything you said was a lie?" I asked. How had I been fooled so easily? She shrugged. "No, that was a happy coincidence." "And you weren't upset with me rejecting you?" She laughed. "Oh no, that didn't bother me in the slightest." My cheeks reddened. "Then why did you threaten me?" Her tone deepening as she replied, "I didn't." "But you said—" She cut me off. "I whispered a protection spell giving you access to see what was there. Whatever you heard wasn't from me, but from it." My core chilled. It didn't make sense, but for some inexplicable reason I believed her, without question. I knew she was telling the truth. I quickly went back to the subject. "You were trying to protect me?" She nodded. "Yes, but I knew I could not do it alone. You need to understand what's happening so we can fight it together." I could feel the gratitude wash over me. "What do we do now?" The woman leaned back, a hint of relief softening her features. "We don't have much time. The more you know, the better prepared you'll be." "What do we need to do?" She reached into her bag and pulled out a small, worn book filled with cryptic symbols and annotations. "First, we need to strengthen the protective barriers around you. This book contains rituals and incantations that can help." She flipped to a page and pointed to a complex diagram. "We'll start with this. It's a binding spell designed to repel malevolent entities." As she explained the steps, I felt a sense of clarity washing over me. The world of the supernatural, which had seemed so bewildering and frightening, now had rules and patterns I could learn. We left the noise of the club and walked side by side down the street towards her home, our footsteps echoing softly on the pavement. Within minutes, we were standing outside her house. I couldn't help looking around the street. I felt we were being watched once more. "You really think something's following me?" I whispered. She nodded. "I do. The signs are all there. But don't worry, I have some things that can help." She unlocked her front door and ushered me inside. The interior was warm and inviting, a stark contrast to the cool night outside. I followed her into the nearest room. Traditionally, I would have thought this would be her living room, but the dark, inky blue walls were completely full of chunky mahogany shelves, each lined with books as well as an array of charms and talismans. She turned on a few lamps and gestured for me to sit on a comfortable armchair. She took a seat across from me and smiled reassuringly as I glanced around the room. Feeling like I had been caught snooping, I looked down and focused on the small table between us, already set up with an assortment of herbs, stones, and handmade charms. "Would you like some tea?" she asked. "Sure, that sounds nice." I sat back listening to the sounds of her moving in the kitchen. I glanced at the room once more. The framed illustrations of mythical creatures and protective symbols scattered in between old, worn books on legends and rituals. I felt oddly calm in this curious room. This was a vast contrast to my minimalist home, full and cluttered, but somehow everything felt like it was in its place. I startled when she spoke. I've always been fascinated by these things. She tilted her head towards the books. "You know, growing up, I heard so many stories from my grandmother. She taught me a lot about how to protect ourselves from things we can't see." She placed 2 steaming mugs of tea on the table before sitting down again. We sat in silence as she slipped off her heels and took a slow sip of her tea. Then, setting it down, her expression turned serious. "The entity that's been following you is drawn to fear and uncertainty. These charms will help, but you have to believe in their power." She indicated to the charms on the table. "But why me? I don't want to be rude, but until last week I had nothing to be scared of, and the one thing I have never been is uncertain." Her eyebrows rose. "Sometimes the walls we build up around us stop us from seeing ourselves." I shook my head. "No, I have everything I've ever wanted and knew myself well enough. Everything was going to plan in my life." She leaned forward, catching my eye, trapping me in her emerald gaze. My heart thudded twice in quick succession. She picked up a small leather pouch and handed it to me. "This is a protection pouch. Keep it with you at all times. It's filled with sage, rosemary, and a few other things. They're known to ward off evil spirits." She then picked up a delicate silver bracelet with intricate designs etched into it. "And this bracelet will help protect your mind from its influence. Wear it, especially when you sleep." I took the bracelet, examining it closely. I slipped it onto my wrist, feeling a slight sense of comfort from its cool weight. "I still don't understand." "You will soon." I hadn't realized that she had moved from her chair and was kneeling in front of me. Looking up with the soft lamplight catching her face, she looked angelic. Something stirred in me, and I resisted the urge to lean down and taste those full lips. She broke into my thoughts, pulling me back into the room. "You're not alone in this. We'll get through it together. Tonight, we'll stay up and keep watch." She picked up a leather-bound book from the table and opened it to a marked page. "This has been in my family for generations. Would you like to read a passage?" I nodded, and she handed me the book. I begin reading aloud from the ancient text, and soon she is reading along with me. Our voices blend together, creating a harmonious and soothing chant that seems to resonate with the walls of the room. At the end of the chapter, I look at her nestled at my feet. She smiled up softly. "You're doing great. Just keep focusing on the words." I continue to read, letting the sound flow without much thought. She occasionally joined me. I am not sure how long I had been reading when she placed her hand on the book and said, "Let's take a break." I handed it to her, and she gently placed it on the floor. She started sharing stories from her childhood, talking about her grandmother and all the folklore she grew up with. Her tales are so vivid and captivating that I get completely drawn in. Before I know it, I'm spilling everything about myself, things I usually keep locked up tight. It's like her stories unlock something in me, and suddenly I'm not worried about revealing my secrets at all. Just like that first night in the restaurant, we're just two people connecting over shared experiences and the magic of storytelling. I have no idea how long we had been sitting here. I was tempted to pull out my phone to check the time, but pushed the thought away. Did it really matter? She took a sip from her now cold tea and suggested brewing another pot. I had completely forgotten mine and felt rude for not touching it. I nod. I watched as she leaves the room and lean my head back on the armchair, silently slipping into peaceful darkness. I wake, not knowing how long I have been asleep. She is curled up on the armchair across from me, her dress replaced with a thick cream dressing gown, her hair now around her shoulders. Her face clear of makeup, she looked older and tired, but still beautiful in her natural state. She half smiled, reading my expression. It's strange, isn't it? How something like this can bring people together. I smiled faintly. I guess it is. I've never really believed in any of this, and to be honest, I am still struggling now. Her smile dropped. Suddenly, a loud noise echoed from outside, a sharp crack startling us both. My body tensed, ready for a fight. My eyes wide, I braced myself, ready for the shadows to enter. She was next to me, placing a reassuring hand on my arm. "It's all right. It could be anything. Stay calm." We sat in silence, listening intently. After a few minutes, the tension in the room slowly dissipated. She began to hum a soothing melody, and my breathing steadied in response. My fear is gradually replaced by a sense of cautious calm. Once the song finished, she looked at me, her eyes wide. "You must believe. If you don't, this will all be for nothing." I just don't know how to." She looked around the room as if she was searching for something. Her shoulders dropped and she straightened up. Returning to her chair, she slumped into it. Her eyes glazed as if in deep thought. I had to make it better, but nothing I could think to say seemed right, so I sighed and said, "Thank you. I don't think I could have done this alone." Her smile returned and she focused back on me. "You're stronger than you think. Remember that." As the first light of dawn began to creep through the windows, the oppressive weight of the night lifted. I stretched, feeling a mix of exhaustion and relief. She stood up and walked over to the heavy curtains and opened them, letting the light pour in. "We made it through the night. How do you feel?" I take a deep breath. "Tired, but better. I think I can do this." She nods. "You can, and you don't have to face it alone." I stood in the soft morning light, feeling the weight of the charms around my neck and wrist. The room, now filled with the warm glow of dawn, seemed almost magical, a stark contrast to the shadows that haunted us through the night. I turned to the woman, her presence a beacon of strength and knowledge. The protective pouch she gave me hung from my belt, its weight a constant reminder of the power it held. The silver bracelet on my wrist felt cool against my skin, its intricate designs glinting in the early light. I take a deep breath. "I guess it's time for me to go." She nodded, her eyes filled with a mix of concern and pain. Her hands moved deftly, adjusting a few of the charms, ensuring they were secure. "Remember, these charms are powerful, but your belief in them and in yourself is even more important." I nodded, feeling a surge of determination. The fear that had gripped me so tightly seemed to loosen its hold, replaced by a steady resolve. "Thank you for everything. I don't think I'd have made it through another night without you." She smiled, a warm, reassuring expression that made me feel like I wasn't alone in this battle. "If you ever need help, you know where to find me." We stood in silence for a moment, the only sound the gentle rustling of leaves outside. The first birds began to sing, their songs a hopeful counterpoint to the night's eerie silence. I glanced around the room one last time, taking in the protective symbols and the lingering scent of the burned herbs. This place had been a sanctuary, but now it was time to step back into the world and face the threat that had been stalking me. With a final nod, I turned and walked towards the door, each step filled with purpose. As I opened the door, the cool morning air washed over me. The sky, a canvas of soft pastels as the sun peeked over the horizon. I felt a mix of apprehension and excitement, the dawn's light filling me with a sense of renewal and possibility. I took a deep breath, the charms clinking softly with the movement, and stepped out into the morning. The road ahead seemed less daunting, the shadows of the night retreating in the face of the rising sun. With the woman's final words echoing in my mind, I started my journey home, each step a testament to the courage and hope I now carried with me. The battle wasn't over, but for the first time I felt truly prepared to face whatever lay ahead.
I stood at the doorway, watching him walk down the quiet street. The sky was lightening, and the first rays of dawn cast a hopeful glow across the neighbourhood. He moved with a determined stride, his back straight and head held high, the charms I had given him clinking softly with each step. "Please let him be strong enough," I softly whispered to myself. As he neared the end of the road, a sudden noise drew my attention. A large red van appeared, barrelling around the corner much too fast. My heart lurched, a cold dread seizing me. "No!" I gasped. I watched in helpless horror as the vehicle struck him with brutal force, sending him flying before he crumpled to the ground, his body motionless. The hopeful light of dawn now seemed a cruel mockery. Tears welling up, I stutter, "Oh no." 3 men jump out and run over to him. I knew in that instant he hadn't made it. The realization was a bitter pill, made even worse by the knowledge that deep down he hadn't truly believed. His lack of faith had been his downfall. A cold shiver ran down my spine, and I felt the familiar, oppressive presence of the shadow behind me. It lingered, malevolent and taunting, feeding off my despair. This wasn't the first man I had lost to it, and each loss cut deeper than the last. "Another failure, little witch. How many more will you lose?" it whispered in the breeze. I clenched my fists, anger and sorrow mixing within me. The morning light was now bathing me in a soft golden glow. I unhook a little velvet purse from my belt and take a handful of herbs. I hold them up to my mouth and blow gently, and watch as they flutter into the air. They dance and twirl in front of me, tiny fragments catching the light and shimmering like miniature stars. As they drift forward, they hit an invisible force, where they momentarily seem to hover and sparkle even brighter, then crack and fall to the ground. I turned back into the house, shutting the door against the rising sun and the tragic scene outside. The weight of the entity's presence was almost unbearable, but I refused to let it break me. Despite the pain, there was always another person to be saved from the shadows. "I won't give up. I can't," I whisper as I close the door.